I should have known better. Looking back, the red flags weren't just there. They were screaming, waving in the wind like a fire sale banner. But when you're in love, or at least convinced you're in love, you learn to look the other way. Or worse, you explain them away. I met Sophia when I was at the peak of my career. I'm 44 now, but back then, at 39, I was thriving. My restaurant chain was expanding rapidly. 15 locations across 3 states. Life was busy, but I was in control. Sophia entered my world like a hurricane. She was 20 at the time, practically a kid compared to me, but she had a magnetic energy that made everyone around her feel alive. She worked as a waitress in one of my restaurants, and before long, she wasn't just working for me. She was mine. Sophia had a past, though. Her ex-husband, Aaron, was only a year older than her. An ordinary working-class guy. It didn't take long for me to realize she had left him for me. I suppose I should have seen that as a warning sign, but I didn't care. I was the older, successful man who swept her off her feet. It felt like a victory. In hindsight, it was a trap. The first couple of years of our marriage were like a whirlwind. Sophia was an infusion of youth in my life, and I basked in the envy of those around me. They saw me as a man who had it all: success, power, and a beautiful young wife. But cracks began to show early. They were subtle at first, almost laughable. She complained about my boring routines or roll her eyes when I suggested staying in on a Friday night instead of hitting some trendy bar or club. "You're acting like an old man," she'd joke, but there was a sharpness to her tone that left me uneasy. Still, I brushed it off. I convinced myself that our age difference meant adjusting to different expectations, different energy levels. She'd eventually settle down, I thought. I was providing her with a life of stability and luxury, things Aaron, her ex, could never dream of giving her. But as time went on, her restlessness grew. Sophia had a taste for adventure, and it didn't take long before she began seeking it elsewhere, or at least that's what I started to suspect. At first, it was small things. She started spending more time out with friends, coming home later than usual. "It's just a girls' night," she'd say, waving me off as she walked out the door in heels that could have doubled as weapons. When she got home, she'd be tipsy, sometimes distant. I chalked it up to harmless fun. After all, wasn't this part of her charm? She was young, vibrant. If I stifled her, wouldn't that push her away? At least that's how I rationalized it. Then came the shifts in her behavior at home. She began guarding her phone more closely, keeping it face down on the table or clutching it like a lifeline whenever she walked into a room. She'd laugh at texts but never share the joke. When I'd ask about her day, her answers became clipped vague. The woman who once greeted me with stories about her day now offered little more than it was fine. I wanted to believe it was just a phase. Relationships change, right? The honeymoon phase ends, and people settle into comfort. That's what I told myself, even as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering why my wife felt like a stranger. The first real red flag came 6 months ago. Sophia had said she was meeting an old friend for drinks. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving, smelling of a new perfume I didn't recognize. When she came home that night, it was late, far later than she'd said it would be. I was still awake, sitting in the living room with a glass of whiskey, pretending to watch TV. When she walked in, her makeup was smudged, and her hair was tousled like she'd been running her hands through it all night. She gave me a distracted smile, muttered something about how fun the night was, and went straight to the bathroom without so much as a glance in my direction. I sat there, staring at the empty glass in my hand, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. Something was off, but when I brought it up the next day, she brushed me off with a laugh. "You're being paranoid," she said. "It was just drinks with a friend. Don't make it weird." And for a while, I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But the thing about doubt is that it festers. Once it's there, it doesn't go away. It grows, spreading like a shadow over everything you thought you knew. Every laugh she didn't share, every late night, every text she turned away from me added another brick to the wall between us. Then, about 3 months ago, I started noticing the name Marcus slipping into our conversations more and more. Marcus, my business partner. Marcus, the man I'd known for years and trusted like a brother. Sophia would mention him in passing, how he'd complimented her dress at a dinner we all attended, or how funny he was during a meeting she'd stopped by. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I started catching little moments between them. Lingering glances. Inside jokes I wasn't a part of. I tried to push the thoughts away. Sophia was my wife. Marcus was my friend. They wouldn't do that to me, would they? The feeling of disconnection between us kept growing, and I decided to try a different approach. If Sophia's world was shifting, maybe I could step into it, bridge the gap between us. It seemed simple enough. Spend more time with her and her friends, get to know the people who were filling the spaces where I used to be. It was logical. It was also a mistake. Our first night out together in her circle was at a trendy rooftop bar downtown. The kind of place with dim lighting, overpriced drinks, and people who looked like they belonged in a glossy magazine spread. Sophia blended in effortlessly, her laugh cutting through the chatter, her energy drawing everyone toward her like moths to a flame. She was magnetic. Watching her from the edge of the group, I realized how much I'd underestimated just how at home she felt in these spaces. Her friends were younger than me, and it showed. They talked about their startups, social media influencers, and the latest cultural trends with a confidence I couldn't fake. Their lives were fast and fluid, filled with ambitions and dramas that felt foreign to me. I tried to listen, tried to absorb the rhythm of their conversations, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was out of place. The drinks didn't help. One of Sophia's colleagues, maybe, had joked that I must live on neat whiskey and late nights, running my restaurant empire. It was meant as a compliment, I think, but it stung in a way I couldn't explain. Every glance, every casual joke seemed to underline just how different I was from everyone around the table. Across the room, Sophia was glowing. She was deep in conversation, her face alight with a kind of joy I hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't until I noticed Marcus standing beside her that the knot in my stomach tightened. He was leaning close, speaking in her ear, his hand resting lightly on her back. She tilted her head toward him, her laughter spilling into the air, effortless and familiar. It was a small moment, fleeting, but it lingered. I tried to participate in the group's conversations a few times, but every attempt felt awkward. Their world was full of references and jokes I didn't understand, and the harder I tried, the more I felt like an outsider. By the time the night ended, I was drained. Sophia, on the other hand, seemed energized, alive in a way that felt both beautiful and distant. At home, the silence felt heavier than usual. Sophia didn't seem to notice. She was scrolling through her phone, still caught up in the glow of the evening. I sat across the room, staring at the darkened TV screen, replaying the night in my head. The laughter, the glances, the casual intimacy between her and Marcus. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it wasn't. But the doubt was there now, a steady thrum at the back of my mind. The next time she went out, I stayed home. She didn't ask why, and I didn't explain. Instead, I sat in the quiet, surrounded by the faint echoes of a life that was beginning to feel like it didn't belong to me. It wasn't just that I didn't fit into her world. It was the realization that she didn't seem to want me there. Her life with her friends, with Marcus, it was seamless. And I was the outlier. That night, as I sat alone on the couch, I realized just how far apart we drifted. It wasn't just the glances or the guarded phone. It was the fact that, for the first time, I felt like a guest in my own marriage. After that night, I withdrew further into myself. I didn't make a conscious decision to stop trying. It just happened. The effort of fitting into Sophia's world had left me more drained than I expected. It wasn't just the conversations or the people. It was the way I felt like an outsider looking in, watching her thrive in a life where I had no place. At first, I convinced myself I was overreacting. She was younger, more social. Of course, our worlds wouldn't completely overlap. But as the days passed, the small cracks in our marriage began to feel like chasms. Sophia went out more often, her nights stretching later and later, her explanations for where she'd been growing vaguer. Just catching up with friends, she'd say, or a quick dinner meeting with Marcus. I told myself it was normal. She was busy. I was busy. This was just a phase. But the quiet moments at home grew heavier, more strained. Sophia's presence became almost ghostly. Here, but never fully. She'd be glued to her phone, scrolling with a faint smile that never seemed to reach her eyes. I'd sit across from her in the living room, pretending to focus on emails or restaurant schedules, all the while wondering who was on the other side of that screen. One night, she left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she went to shower. The opportunity was right there. I stared at the device, my heart pounding, my mind spinning with a mix of guilt and curiosity. It would have been so easy to pick it up, to unlock the answers that felt just out of reach. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I went outside, sat on the back porch, and tried to clear my head. The evening air was crisp, the kind that sinks into your bones and demands your attention. I thought about when we first got married, the whirlwind of it all. How quickly we'd moved from infatuation to commitment. How sure I'd been that I could give her everything she needed. The memory felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else entirely. In the weeks that followed, I tried to focus on work. My restaurants had always been my anchor, the thing I could throw myself into when everything else felt uncertain. I spent longer hours at the office, poring over numbers, staff schedules, expansion plans, anything to keep my mind occupied. It worked for a while. The distractions helped me ignore the sinking feeling in my chest when I came home to an empty house or saw Sophia's car pulling out of the driveway as I was pulling in. Still, the unease wouldn't go away. It clung to me, a weight I carried everywhere. The doubts became sharper, harder to suppress. I started paying closer attention to the little things. The way Sophia avoided eye contact when I asked about her day, the way she glanced at her phone whenever it buzzed, the way her laughter felt just a little too forced when we were alone. And then there was Marcus. His name kept cropping up in her stories. Always casually, always in passing. He was helping her plan a work event, or giving her advice about something trivial. On the surface, it seemed harmless, but the way she talked about him felt different, like he was more than just a colleague. One afternoon, I tried to approach her about it. Not directly, but enough to test the waters. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone as usual. I asked if Marcus was going to be at an upcoming event she'd mentioned. Her response was quick, almost dismissive. Of course. He's always at those things. There was nothing accusatory in her tone, nothing overtly suspicious. But the ease with which she said it, the casual familiarity, left me unsettled. Marcus had become a fixture in her life, one that seemed to occupy a space I couldn't reach. I spent that night in the guest room. I told myself it was because I'd been up late working and didn't want to disturb her. But the truth was, I couldn't bring myself to lie next to her. Not with the growing distance between us. Not with the questions swirling in my mind. Sophia didn't say anything the next morning. She left early, claiming she had errands to run before meeting a friend for lunch. I stayed behind, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The silence of the house felt oppressive, a constant reminder of the emptiness that had settled between us. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, half in, half out of a marriage that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed answers first. Proof that my suspicions weren't just a figment of my imagination. It was then that I decided to start paying closer attention, not just to her, but to the patterns, the small details that might paint a larger picture. If there was something happening, I was going to find out. And if there wasn't, well, I'd deal with that when the time came. For now, I would wait, quietly, patiently. The truth, whatever it was, would reveal itself. It had been gnawing at me for weeks. The way Marcus's name kept slipping into conversations, the ease with which Sophia mentioned him as if he were part of our daily lives. The tension had built slowly, like water rising behind a dam, until I couldn't hold it back any longer. That evening, as she scrolled on her phone with the calm detachment that had become her norm, I finally asked her about him. The shift in her expression was subtle, but unmistakable. Her face remained relaxed, her movements unhurried, but there was something in her body language, a flicker of surprise, a momentary pause before she returned to the calm demeanor I'd grown so accustomed to. She didn't react defensively, didn't bristle or overcorrect. Instead, she laughed, a soft, amused sound that made the tension in my chest tighten. The question seemed almost absurd to her, as though the very idea of her and Marcus was so far removed from reality that it didn't warrant consideration. Her response was confident, dismissive even. She brushed it off like a speck of dust on her shoulder, treating my concern as a fleeting insecurity rather than a genuine issue. But as I studied her, trying to decipher the sincerity in her reaction, she shifted the conversation. She began to talk about the business, her tone earnest now, full of excitement and determination. She spoke about wanting to get involved, to make a difference. For months, she had seemed uninterested in my work, content to let it remain a distant backdrop to her life. Now she wanted to step into it, to be a part of it. She laid out her ideas with enthusiasm, focusing on the restaurant chain's lackluster online presence. She painted a picture of a more modern, dynamic brand, one that could connect with younger audiences and stand out in a crowded market. The change in her energy was almost jarring. Where there had been detachment and distraction before, there was now a clear drive, a vision she wanted to bring to life. Her proposal wasn't entirely without merit. My restaurants had always been built on tradition and quality, but the world was changing and the way people engage with businesses was evolving. A stronger online presence could only help. Yet, as I listened, I couldn't ignore the timing. Why now? Why this sudden interest in becoming more involved when she'd spent so long pulling away? There was a sincerity to her words that made it difficult to dismiss her outright. She wanted to be more than just my wife. She said, to contribute something meaningful to the business. On the surface, it sounded admirable, even logical. But beneath her enthusiasm, I couldn't help but sense an ulterior motive. Was this her way of redirecting the conversation, of shifting my focus away from the doubts I'd expressed about Marcus? Or was it something else entirely? As she continued, her excitement grew, and I could see that she believed in the value of what she was proposing. But even as she spoke, I felt a distance growing between us, a gap that her words couldn't bridge. I nodded, letting her finish, but I couldn't bring myself to agree outright. Instead, I told her I'd consider it, though I wasn't sure whether I meant it. Later that night, as Sophia went to bed, I stayed behind in the living room, the faint hum of the air conditioner the only sound in the quiet house. I sat on the couch, staring at the glass of wine she had left on the table, my thoughts circling back to her reaction. There had been no anger, no real emotion, just laughter and confidence. But that lack of emotion unsettled me. It was too easy, too practiced, as though she'd anticipated the question and had been prepared for it. Her sudden interest in the business didn't feel entirely genuine. It felt more like a distraction, a way to redirect the conversation and reassert herself in a space she had previously ignored. I wanted to believe her, to trust that this was a genuine effort to reconnect. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more calculated than that. As I sat there in the quiet of the night, the weight of my doubts pressed heavier than ever. If this was her way of mending the rift between us, it only highlighted just how far apart we drifted. A few days after our conversation, Sophia's involvement in the business began to take shape, or at least that's what she claimed. She started spending more time at meetings and events related to the restaurants, insisting that her presence was necessary to help bring a fresh perspective. At first, I tried to take it at face value. After all, I told her I'd think about her involvement, and perhaps this was her way of showing she was serious. But what caught my attention, and not in a good way, was how often Marcus's name came up in her new role. Marcus had always been a key part of the business, managing the marketing and public relations for the entire network. He was good at it too. His campaigns had brought in significant traffic over the years, and his knack for creating buzz had helped build the brand's reputation. He was deeply involved in the day-to-day operations, and now, apparently, so was Sophia. She started seeing Marcus more often, spending long hours with him brainstorming ideas and reviewing strategies. She would mention these meetings casually, as though they were nothing out of the ordinary. Marcus thinks we should focus on video content for social media, she'd say over dinner. Or, Marcus is helping me learn how to coordinate campaigns. Her tone was light, matter-of-fact, but every mention of his name felt like a stone dropped into my stomach. I wanted to believe it was innocent. I wanted to believe that her new role was exactly what she said it was, a chance to contribute to the business, to bring something new to the table. But the more I observed, the harder it became to convince myself of her sincerity. There were small things, details that didn't add up. She'd come home late from one of their work sessions, her hair slightly disheveled, her lipstick faded in a way that didn't suggest a long day at the office. She'd be unusually cheerful after these meetings, her mood brighter, her energy palpable. It was subtle, but it was there. Then there were the inconsistencies. One night, she mentioned that she and Marcus had been working on a new marketing proposal at one of the restaurants. But the next morning, when I stopped by the same location to drop off some papers, the staff seemed confused when I asked about her. No one remembered seeing Sophia or Marcus there the night before. The doubt that had been growing in my mind began to solidify. Her explanation sounded plausible on the surface. Marcus was, after all, responsible for marketing, and her involvement in that area made sense. But the details didn't hold up under scrutiny. I started noticing patterns in her behavior, little shifts that pointed to something more than just professional collaboration. I began keeping track of her meetings, her excuses, the time she said she was with Marcus versus the times I could verify it. The gaps were glaring. On more than one occasion, she claimed to be at a work event with Marcus, only for me to find out later that the event didn't exist or that Marcus had been somewhere else entirely. I tried to confront the evidence logically, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But the clues were piling up, and they all pointed to the same conclusion. This wasn't just about her role in the business. It wasn't about marketing or social media. There was something between them, something she wasn't admitting to. Even my staff started to notice. One of my managers, a sharp-eyed woman named Denise, pulled me aside after a staff meeting. "Is everything okay with Sophia and Marcus?" she asked carefully, her voice low. "They've been spending a lot of time together lately. People are starting to talk." I told her it was nothing, brushing it off as quickly as I could. But her words stayed with me, reinforcing the doubts I'd tried so hard to suppress. That night, as Sophia came home late again, I watched her carefully. She walked in with a smile, her cheeks slightly flushed, her energy high. She told me they'd made great progress on a new campaign idea, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. But I didn't respond. I just watched her, my mind replaying all the inconsistencies, all the clues. I wanted to confront her, to lay everything out and demand the truth. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she would find a way to spin it, to twist my doubts into paranoia and deflect my questions with charm. If there was something going on between her and Marcus, I needed proof. Something undeniable. For now, I kept my suspicions to myself, letting her believe I was oblivious. But the knot in my chest tightened with every passing day, every late-night work session, every easy smile she gave me as she walked through the door. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. The doubt had festered long enough. Every late night, every casual mention of Marcus, every inconsistency in her stories, it all pointed to something I couldn't ignore any longer. If Sophia wouldn't give me the truth, I would have to find it myself. And that's exactly what I decided to do. Marcus's laptop was my target. He often brought it to meetings in my office, using it to present campaign ideas or go over analytics. I'd seen him set it down carelessly on the conference table more than once, distracted by phone calls or conversation. It wouldn't be hard to find an opportunity to access it, and I told myself it was a necessary step. If there was nothing to hide, I'd find nothing. But if there was something, well, I needed to know. The chance came a few days later during a meeting at the main office. Marcus had stepped out to take a call, leaving his laptop open on the table. I glanced around the room. No one seemed to be paying attention. My heart pounded as I walked over, my hands steady despite the storm brewing inside me. I sat down and quickly plugged in the small USB drive I brought with me, one designed to extract data in seconds. As the files copied over, I stared at the screen, unsure of what I'd find. Marcus's folders were labeled innocuously: campaigns, analytics, client reports. But one folder stood out. It was buried deeper in the directory, innocuously titled projects, but the contents were anything but professional. When the transfer finished, I removed the drive and slipped it into my pocket just as Marcus walked back into the room. He barely glanced at me, too busy finishing his call, and I excused myself, claiming I had another meeting to attend. My heart didn't stop racing until I was back at home, sitting at my desk with the USB drive in front of me. The truth was waiting inside. I opened the files, bracing myself for what I might see. The first few folders were harmless: work documents, spreadsheets, even a few presentation drafts. But then I found it, a folder labeled private. My stomach twisted as I clicked on it. The photos hit me like a freight train. At first, they seemed innocent enough: pictures of Marcus at work events, snapshots of dinners with colleagues. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. There were photos of Sophia, ones I'd never seen before. Some were taken during casual moments, her smiling at a table, holding a glass of wine. But then there were others, more intimate, more deliberate. A picture of her leaning against a doorway, her dress slipping off one shoulder. Another of her lying on a couch, her expression playful, her pose seductive. My hands clenched in a fist as I clicked through them, the pit in my stomach growing heavier with each image. And then I saw it, a photo of Marcus and Sophia kissing, her arms wrapped around his neck, her body pressed against his. It was unmistakable. They weren't just working together. They weren't just friends. This was an affair, blatant and unapologetic, captured in full color. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, my breath shallow and uneven. My mind raced, a torrent of anger, betrayal, and disbelief crashing over me. I had suspected it for weeks, months even, but seeing the proof laid out in front of me made it all painfully real. Still, I didn't stop. I opened every file, scoured every image, every message I could find. There were texts between them too, saved in screenshots, flirty exchanges, plans to meet, inside jokes that cut deeper than any knife. Marcus had saved everything, as if he wanted to relive it later, to savor the betrayal. When I'd seen enough, I downloaded it all. The photos, the messages, every piece of evidence. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, but I knew I couldn't leave it there. This was my proof, my leverage. If Sophia and Marcus thought they could keep this hidden, they were wrong. But I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not her, not Marcus, not even the closest people in my life. This wasn't the time for confrontation or drama. I needed to think, to process what I'd found, to decide what came next. The rage bubbling inside me was barely contained, but I knew acting impulsively would only make things worse. Instead, I stored the files on a secure drive, locking them away for the moment. The truth was mine now, and it gave me a strange sense of power. Sophia had built her lies carefully, and Marcus had helped her maintain them. But their web of deceit was fragile, and I held the blade that could cut through it. As the evening wore on, I sat alone in the darkened living room, the glow of the screen casting shadows on the walls. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence oppressive. Sophia wouldn't be home until late, another meeting with Marcus, no doubt. But this time, her lies didn't matter. I knew the truth now, and soon, so would she. For now, I would wait, quietly, patiently. The reckoning would come in my own time, on my own terms. The fallout from the evening spread like wildfire. The guests wasted no time sharing the details of what had happened. First in whispers, then through texts, and finally on social media. By morning, the scandal had become the talk of the city, an open secret among the restaurant network's employees, partners, and even customers. Everyone knew what Marcus and Sophia had done, and the consequences were swift. Marcus's position at the company became untenable almost immediately. His colleagues, once charmed by his charisma and marketing prowess, turned on him with a vengeance. They demanded his dismissal, citing not only his betrayal of the owner, but also the damage he had done to the company's reputation. Staff members refused to work with him. Franchise owners threatened to sever ties, and even clients began to distance themselves, unwilling to associate with the scandal. It didn't take long for me to take action. I met with the board of advisors and presented the case against Marcus, including the evidence I had gathered. His termination was unanimous and immediate. By the end of the week, Marcus was out of a job, his professional reputation in ruins. His ex-wife, who had left him years earlier, refused to support him, cutting the last remaining thread of stability in his life. He was left with nothing but the wreckage of his choices. Sophia fared no better. As news of our divorce spread, her once bright social circle dissolved. Friends who had once admired her energy and charm now kept their distance, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. She moved out of the house, taking little with her, as the terms of our prenup ensured she would leave without a financial safety net. The divorce proceedings were quick and public. I made no effort to keep the details private, knowing that transparency was the best way to reclaim my integrity and protect my business. The community, surprisingly, rallied around me. Longtime employees, friends, and even customers reached out with words of support, their loyalty a reminder that not all relationships were built on betrayal. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild, not just the business but my own life. I threw myself into my work, focusing on expanding the restaurant chain and repairing its image. I brought in a new marketing team, emphasizing trust and collaboration. The changes reinvigorated the company, giving it a sense of purpose and direction that had been missing for months. On a personal level, I embraced the quiet of my new life. The house, once filled with tension and unspoken doubts, became a place of peace. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I'd neglected, and even began traveling, something I hadn't done in years. Each day felt like a step toward reclaiming the parts of myself I'd lost in the chaos. Looking back, I realized that this experience had taught me more than I ever anticipated. Betrayal is a bitter teacher, but its lessons are unforgettable. The most important thing I learned is the value of trusting your instincts. When something feels off, it usually is. Ignoring the signs, no matter how small, only delays the inevitable. I also learned the importance of boundaries. Love and trust are vital, but they can't exist without mutual respect. If someone doesn't value what you bring to the table, it's better to walk away than to compromise your dignity trying to hold on. Finally, I learned that revenge, while satisfying in the moment, isn't a solution. The fallout from my plan left Sophia and Marcus with nothing, but it didn't fill the void their betrayal had created. Healing came not from their downfall, but from the steps I took to rebuild my own life. If I could offer advice to anyone facing a similar situation, it would be this: don't rush to act out of anger. Take the time to understand what you need, not just to retaliate, but to move forward. Protect yourself, but don't let their actions define you. Focus on what comes next, and remember that life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. As I stood in the quiet of my home one evening, looking out over the city that had once felt so suffocating, I realized I was no longer weighed down by the past. The future stretched out before me, open and full of possibility. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it.